This is Musical Talk.
Musical Talk.
The UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Musical Talk. The UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. My name is Nick Hudson. We have a great show coming up for you today. First, we're going to have a wonderful interview that Mike Shapiro did with lyricist, composer, and actress Val Vigoda. And then we're going to have a brief discussion that Antonia and I had about Carousel that is playing at the London Coliseum. So, it's my absolute pleasure to send you stateside, and I'm going to hand you over to Mike Shapiro. Thanks, Mike.
So when the royal mailman brings my invitation, he'll know me. He'll have something to show me. I will not be forgotten. I will shake my very fist. I have got such a rotten little present, misbegotten and
Hello everyone, Mike Shapiro here. I've stopped using my middle name on the show because I feel like at this point we're all friends. If you're interested in contemporary musical theater, you really ought to get to know Val Vigoda. Val is a performer and lyricist who has helped create some strikingly original pop-infused music for theater. We often think of lyricists as strictly literary types who work their magic behind the scenes. What makes Val particularly interesting is her triple identity as lyricist, actor, and musician. And as we'll see, this impacts both the subject matter of her musicals and involves some performance practices like live looping that are fairly unusual in the musical theater world. Finally, we'll take a deep dive into Val's new show, Earnest Shackleton Loves Me, which is currently running Off Broadway. And post-finally, if you're within travel distance of New York, you'll want to stick around after the interview because we're giving away a pair of tickets to her show, possibly to you. At the very end of the interview, I'll tell you how you can enter the giveaway. For now, let's take a listen to my chat with Val. Welcome to the show, Val.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Cool. And when I say it's currently running, I mean that in a very literal sense, in that you have a show tonight. Is that right?
I do. Yep. It's Thursday night. I have a show at 8 o'clock. We just opened a few days ago, and we are in a limited run through June 11th at second stage.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your taking the time to talk on a performance day. I'm sure the cab is right outside and waiting, so we'll try not to go on too long here.
Nothing so fancy. Taking the subway.
Cool. So your background as a creative and a performing artist has a dizzying number of facets. I'm actually exhausted just talking to you already. It seems to me that your earliest work as a performer was with the band Groove Lily. Is that correct?
Yes, that was my band that I founded with Brendan Milburn, and Gene Lewin became our drummer. And we spent a long time touring the indie circuit. So we played colleges, we played festivals, we played theaters and performing arts centers, doing our own stuff, and ended up making a turn into the world of theater right around 2002.
How would you characterize the style of the band?
That was always a hard thing for us because we had 3 lead singers and we all really came from different backgrounds. You know, I came from a background as a classical violinist and singer. Brendan came from rock and roll and musical theater, and Gene was sort of a jazz drummer. And so we were basically a theatrical pop trio and did lots of 3-part harmony. It was electric violin, keyboards, and drums. And we were very hard to categorize, which made us interesting and fun to listen to, but it was also, it was sort of the bane of our existence when we were trying to get signed to a record label. That was very hard for us. And we would do showcase after showcase where the executives would say, oh, this is really interesting, this is really refreshing. I don't know how to sell this. And they kept calling us to Broadway for pop. You know, this sounds too theatrical, too Broadway for us. And it wasn't really until we embraced that we sort of found our niche.
That's very interesting. So there was this observation that there was perhaps a storytelling quality to your music.
Absolutely. I think definitely a lot of attention to lyric craft and just we just love words, and we tend to be kind of wordy sometimes. And so we actually found a nice foothold for a while in the world of folk music, where people care equally about lyrics and lyric craft, as I think they do in theater. And yeah, I think melodically and harmonically, we are on the theatrical edge of pop, or the pop edge of theater, somewhere right in between those.
It's an interesting observation you make about the common ground between folk and maybe country music and musical theater, in that they're both very storytelling oriented, in contrast to maybe traditional pop music, which tends to just be about living in this moment or expressing a abstract feeling of some kind.
Absolutely. Well, I think that we just sort of naturally, even when we weren't trying to write theatrically, we sort of did that anyway. Songs that had motion, songs that had what one of our directors used to call bicycle, so that you start at one place at the beginning of the song, and by the end you have moved. And that to me is interesting. And I think all three of us felt that way throughout Groove Lily's history.
And that's really the main differentiator of a good theater song, in contrast to a lot of pop music, is it does have this sense of forward motion. And it sounds like you were on that wavelength already.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, you mentioned in passing the electric violin, and anyone who's seen you recently knows that that's a bit of your signature instrument. And it's such an interesting instrument that I thought it might be worth pausing and asking you to describe it a little bit to the listeners, and maybe tell us how it's different in sound and mechanically from a traditional violin.
Absolutely. I grew up as a classical violinist, and when I started writing songs and playing in bands and all of that, I really wanted to use my violin in that setting. And so for a long time, I tried putting a pickup on my acoustic violin, or experimenting with existing electric violin styles. At one point, I even had a boyfriend who made me an electric violin. And so I, little by little, was edging toward the wish and desire to sing and play at the same time. And it was in the late 90s when I heard about Mark Wood, who is this amazing innovator and inventor, as well as player of electric violins. And he created a style of electric violin called the Viper, which is a flying V-shape violin. And it straps onto your body so that it goes over your left shoulder, the strap, and then under around the other side. And there's a tripod, so that instead of the traditional chin rest and having to hold up the instrument with a combination of your shoulder, your chin, and your hand, suddenly the instrument is like the prow of a ship. It's on your body, and you're really holding it up with your torso, so that there's no chin rest. And you can, for me, it really changed my world, because I could turn my head and sing into a microphone and sing and play simultaneously in a much more comfortable and free way. And so that's one thing that I love about the Viper. Other aspects of it that are also life-changing for me. Number one, it has more strings. The one that I play is a 6-string, so it's the typical 4 strings of violin, and then plus 2 more on the low end. So there's a low C string like a viola, and then a low F below that. So what you have is a 6-string instrument that has range of violin, viola, and cello all in one. And it also has little tiny frets on it, so that sort of like a guitar player, you can think in a more harmonic way. And it also serves as a really great visual aid, in certain situations when there's a lot of going on, and lots of noise on stage or whatever. It's very nice to be able to look and say, oh, I think I'm playing a C sharp. That's pretty, I'm close. And so the third thing about it that I love is that, like an electric guitar, you can put it through different effects. So I can make it sound like a violin or a cello. Then I can put some distortion on it. It can sound like an electric guitar. And you can put delay and just all the things that you think of when you think of electric guitar, and the sort of spectrum of different colors and sounds that they can do. That's what you can do with this. And So it's been a wonderful process for me of learning how to do that. First I had to learn how to sing and play at the same time, which took me a while, and finally got comfortable with it. And now I do it a lot. And then also got more familiar with and more comfortable with all the different gear.
I imagine that since you've got one string that's normally, well, you've got two strings that are normally not on a violin, and one that's, if you're saying there's a low F, that's not really natural to string instruments at all. I imagine there was a certain amount of self-tutelage in just finding your way around the new strings.
Yes, it definitely took a while to automatically hit the string that you're aiming for. And just to get used to going from a 4-string to a 6-string. I would say it took me a good year to feel comfortable with it. But it is the same technique. You take your classical violin technique and you can just sort of overlay it onto playing the Viper. It just takes a little bit of practice.
So if we look at your personal history, what was the point where you started to make the transition from pop, folk pop, touring band to theater writers?
It really was right around 2001, 2002, after we had been touring as an indie band for quite a while, and we were slogging it out. We were making it happen. We were making a living. we were playing 150 shows a year, and we used to joke around that we played shows for free, but we got paid to drive, and we were just driving and driving. And we had our own sound system. We were always carrying gear everywhere. It was just a very exhausting situation. And, yes, we got to play music and there was a lot of joy in that. But after a while, we really started to burn out on the traveling. And we were also thinking at the time I was married to Brendan in the band, and we were thinking that we might want to have a baby. We might want to stop driving so much. And right around then, we got connected with some people in the theater world. Brendan had actually gotten his graduate degree in writing for the theater 7 years before that, and had sort of turned away from the theater world because it can be very daunting to go from having an idea to having a full production. It can be, up to a decade sometimes. Whereas if you're an indie band, you can write a song in the afternoon and you can play it in the evening for somebody. There's a lot more just like direct. There can be more of a direct line from conception to performance. So once we as Groove Lily started to get a little bit of notoriety, we were invited to showcase as part of. It was an NYU alum event, I believe, and we showcased at Joe's Pub. And in the audience were a bunch of theater people, including Ted Sperling, who was the associate artistic director at a theater called The Prince. And he needed to fill the season, and he really liked what he saw. And he immediately came up to us and asked, "Do you have anything that you're writing for the theater?" And Brendan, who had his master's in writing for the theater, said, "Well, no, I've been playing in this band for all these years, so I don't really have anything." And Ted said, "Well, can you write something? Can you write something and have it ready for our holiday season in 10 months?" This, I think, was January of 2002. And so, of course, we immediately said yes. And through the NYU connections, we were connected with Rachel Schenken, a wonderful playwright. And we were lucky enough to find her before she won her Tony for the 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee. And we decided that we wanted to write a holiday show, partly inspired by my experience touring with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. And if you're familiar with them, you'll know that they every year do this very bombastic hard rock holiday show that
I've heard about them for a number of years. They sound fascinating.
Yeah, they are. I toured with them for a couple of years as their concertmaster for the West Coast Orchestra. And it's an alternative to the Nutcracker, right? It's hard rock versions of Silver Bells and Mozart pieces and some originals. And it's very, very involving. And it is also tied together with sort of a thin story narrative. And realized that when we were asked to write something for this Prince Theater, that we could do our own alternative to the Nutcracker holiday show, our style. So instead of making it a Christmas story, we made it a New Year's story. We wanted to really be for everyone. And we ended up basing it loosely on The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen. And we wrote it with Rachel Schinken, and it turned into one of the first pieces that included actor-musicians. And we just did that because that's what we were. We wrote a show for us. We thought of it as a concert with a story. And when we went to the Prince that following November, after having written most of the show in the van as we were driving, showed up there, it was like a miracle that we set up our gear one time and we got to leave it there. And we didn't have to set up the drums every night. And somebody else was running sound. Somebody else was running lights. Somebody else was promoting the show. Somebody else was like there was a whole team in place, and it wasn't the DIY slog that we had been doing for all these years. And it was so wonderful. we loved it.
I'm guessing you were immediately sold on the lifestyle of being theater writers from that point.
It was like 4 weeks of resting. It was like, oh, we just have to do the show. That's all. That's amazing. And the response was fantastic. Even our first draft of the show in 2002, again, suddenly reviewers were just automatically coming to the theater to review us. We didn't have to chase them down to ask them to try to get somebody to care, and it was just a totally new experience. And that show, the experience of writing that show, performing in that show, really changed our lives. And we ended up doing that show in 2002 in Philadelphia. Then we did it in 2003 at the Old Globe in San Diego. We did it in 2004 at Theater Works in Palo Alto. Brought it to Off Broadway to Ars Nova 2005. And then 2006, we did it at the Daryl Roth Off Broadway. And it changed our lives. And suddenly, we had taken this sort of side entrance into the world of theater as a band. This was before all the John Doyle productions and people playing instruments on stage. It was really sort of a pioneering thing that we happened into.
At this juncture, I'm pausing the interview so I can share an example of Milburn and Vigoda's songwriting and lyrical craftsmanship. You'll also get to hear Val's vocals. This is a song from the cast album of the original version of the musical Sleeping Beauty Wakes. The song is collectively credited to the band Groove Lily.
From moving, it's a creepy, crawly, restless, gnawing at my knees. Nothing is working. I heard that you know what you're doing, so I ask you, I beg you, can you give me something, please?
Help me, doctor. I cannot stop walking in my sleep, and I'm a nuisance, a danger, a worry to my children and my wife. Nothing is working, locking me up, won't even keep me safe. I ask you, I beg you, 'cause it's ruining my life. Can you cure me? Can you cure me? With a wire, with a pill, keep me safe and keep me still. Can you cure?
It sounds like it was a perfect transition from the type of music and performance you were doing into theater world, and that it has some elements of both worlds. It's a very nice transition piece.
I completely agree. It was the first time I had ever been involved in writing a piece of theater. So I had to be schooled in how really to organically fuse the book and the score, and also about how much rewriting there is to do. I was not as used to that. I mean, now I am, but in 2002, I would try to hold on to things, and that was a huge learning experience for me to really be able to just kill your darlings, as they say.
So it's not all a luxurious life of letting other people do your promotions. Turns out there's a dark side to it too.
Yes, there is. It's all in the rewrites. All in the rewrites. That's what we've been doing very intensely here for the Shackleton show for the last month.
And I do want to make sure we have enough time to talk about your new show, but there are a few points in your theater writing resume that I thought were really interesting and that I'd like to touch upon. We'll fast forward a little bit through what's happened since then. You wrote a piece for Disney, which was a abbreviated version, a live version of Toy Story that ran on Disney cruises. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. There was a date that sort of really changed our lives in terms of these opportunities, these writing opportunities. And that was in October of 2004 when we did Striking 12 at the National Alliance of Musical Theater. And we did this 45-minute showcase of the show. And having done a zillion unsuccessful record company showcases in our lives, we were completely blasé about this. We're like, oh yeah, whatever, another showcase. Like we show up and we're sitting on stage and we're getting ready to play our little condensed version of Striking 12. And the people in the audience, who are all these theater movers and shakers, were waiting for the actors to come out. And then they thought we were the band and that the actors were going to arrive. And then we turned out to just be it. And we did it. And people went kind of crazy. And at the end of our showcase, our agent was sort of overwhelmed by tons and tons of people with business cards. They wanted our CDs. He was handing out CDs faster than he could possibly think. And all of a sudden, because of that moment, our careers went up another level. And so we were suddenly being offered commissions, and one of them was from Disney. And we were offered the chance to compete to write Toy Story, the musical. And at first, we actually did not get the gig. But it was a year later, when the team they had chosen actually dropped out, that they came back to us. And it was a wonderful experience where we got to write the rest of the score to make sure that it sounded like a cross between Randy Newman, because they were going to keep You've Got a Friend in Me as part of the score, and then add the rest of the songs that we would write. And it was a 1-hour version of the story. And we got to meet and work with John Lasseter, who was fantastic to work with, as well as Matt Olmos and Annie Hamburger and Matt Walker and people at Disney that we are still close with and we still work with. And it was amazing. There were beautiful puppets for it. And it was such a beloved story. And I remember it was actually one of the first dates that I had gone on with my then husband was Toy Story. And getting to write that was just a huge, huge highlight. And one of the things that came out of that experience also was we met Wade McCollum, who is now co-starring with me in Ernest Shackleton Loves Me. He was our first Woody in the workshop of that show.
There's an instructional lesson here that I think might be interesting for theater writers in our listening audience, and that is one thing that gave you a leg up and let your career really move forward was the ease at which you could self-present. You could present your own music and your own material at all these showcases because that was your background. You were performers. And that seems to have given you a real advantage and led to some of these crucial junctures where you were at the right place at the right time and made a sufficiently compelling performance of your own work.
I think that is true. I think that's very accurate. And it made us memorable in a way.
Turning to the present, why don't we talk about your currently running show called Ernest Shackleton Loves Me. Can you give us a big picture overview of what the show is about?
Yes, absolutely. Ernest Shackleton Loves Me is a adventure love story female empowerment show. And basically, it's the story of a woman who is very much like me, who is an overworked, overwhelmed, exhausted single mom who's a musician, electric violinist. She does live looping. She writes music for video games. And she has a 5-month-old baby. And she's absolutely overwhelmed, and she feels like she can't do it alone. And she's having trouble coping. She has not slept in 36 hours. And the baby daddy has left to go on tour with a Journey cover band. And so she makes a dating video. And the person that responds to that dating video through the Magic Theater is Ernest Shackleton, the Antarctic explorer from 100 years ago.
And he's responding to her personal ad.
That's right. Specifically to the music that she plays, her stirring, sort of anthemic, beautiful music called Star Blazers for the video game that she's writing for. And he hears this music and is completely bowled over by her and calls her his muse and falls in love with her and says that she's inspired him to bring a banjo on this expedition. So Ernest Shackleton was one of the great heroes, great optimists of history. And he took 27 men to the Antarctic in 1914. And when they got within 100 miles of their destination, their ship got trapped and crushed and destroyed by the ice, and it sank, leaving them on the edge of the planet where they should have all died. And it's because Shackleton was such a brilliant leader and relentless optimist that it did not turn out that way. And so in our show, my character, whose name is Kat, as Ernest calls her, he contacts her on the phone, and she's not sure if it's a prank call, and then he ends up Skyping with her. And then, as she's finding out more and more about his expedition, suddenly he comes through her refrigerator in this amazing entrance and takes her on the journey, on the expedition of the Endurance. And so her apartment becomes the Antarctic, and they have this grand adventure. And what we see also around and behind are projections, most of which are actual images from the actual journey. It's one of the amazing things, one of the many amazing things about Shackleton's voyage was that it was sponsored by the Royal Geographic Society, and they sponsored a documentarian to come along, so that there was a guy taking photos, taking pictures on those big glass plates and filming. So there is actual footage of the ship getting crushed and destroyed and sinking. And there's footage of the men playing football on the ice floes, and the dogs and puppies and all this. And it's real, and it survived from the Antarctic.
That must have been, for that photographer, a dream gig and a nightmare at the same time.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And in order to save them, they had to actually ruthlessly destroy most of them, so they wouldn't be tempted to go back and endanger themselves. So 200 images survived, and the rest are gone. But just the fact that they exist and the fact that we can use them in the theater just heightens the impact of the story in such a great way. So it really feels very immersive, like you're there, like you're in 1914, 1915, 1916.
Now, to draw out, to state the obvious, it's a very imaginative premise, and you're playing fast and loose with the laws of time and space.
Yes, absolutely. I won't do any more spoilers for the show, but basically this unbelievably inspiring story, getting to tell that story through the lens of this modern character who we can relate to as somebody in 2017 who has issues that we can understand, is just exhilarating. And the point of the whole thing is, if Shackleton can do what he did, which is unbelievable, then we can really handle anything in our lives. And we can cope, we can be self-reliant, we can persevere, and that is the feeling that we want the audience to leave with.
So you have a contemporary character with very contemporary problems, in that she's a single mom and she's working in the overlap of technology and the entertainment industry. And I assume there are themes of isolation because that's what Ernest Shackleton dealt with. And you're making a metaphorical connection to a more timeless struggle and showing the similarities between the two.
You got it. Yes.
That was a pretty lucky guess. You've set that up very well in describing the story, and I can immediately see, without having seen the show, I can kind of piece together the analogy that you're making.
Over the past year, we started writing the show about 8 years ago, and strangely, my life has come to resemble the plot of the show more and more. And it was not something planned or expected at all. I mean, I was not a single mom when we started, and now I am. And the process actually of doing some of these rewrites that we've just done over the past month to get rid of any overly farcical or campy elements that we used to have and really deepen the story and make it more real, as absurd and surreal as the whole thing is and magical, it actually is quite real feeling in terms of the emotional arc of Cat. And those last rewrites have been so close to my actual life that it has been a very emotional it's been a very emotional journey over the past few weeks, especially trying to zero in and make those rewrites as powerful as possible. And right now we are super happy with the way they turned out. But it gets close to home, sometimes.
Did you find that tonally the mood has shifted as the story has, as you felt that there's more in common with the story and your own life? Is that what motivated you to make the tone less flippant, a little less goofy and more naturalistic?
Yes, partly. And plot-wise also, there used to be this one plot twist where the character of Ponce de Leon, who also calls me and is also vying for my affections and has this funny song near the beginning. What used to happen is we would go on the huge voyage, and then Ernest would leave, and then Ponce de Leon would come through the oven, and he would be rivals with Shackleton for my affections. There would be a duel. It got so crazy. It was hilarious. And, people were really responding to it, which was why it was hard to cut it. But in service of making the journey really land, we had to get rid of that whole part. So Ponce de Leon no longer comes out of the oven. So some of those rewrites were really Joe DiPietro, doing lots of amazing work on the book. But there were also some of the lyric rewrites that I had to do that were specific to Cat.
Now let's take a moment to talk about some of your creative collaborators on this project. You mentioned Joe DiPietro, who worked on Memphis, and I believe won a Tony for that.
Yep.
And your longtime creative partner, Brendan Milburn, who I believe was your co-performer in Groove Lily, is the composer on this project. Is that all correct?
That is correct. Yes. Brendan has written almost all of the music for the show. And very recently, since he has not been involved for the last couple of months, Ryan O'Connell, who is the music director and orchestrator, has stepped up to co-write a couple of things with me. Specifically, the very last big 11 o'clock number, which is at the end of the Endurance journey.
So you and Brendan really made that journey from the pop performance world into the musical theater world together, where you were co-performers and then composer lyricist collaborators as you entered this new world.
Absolutely, yes. We had been writing together since really before we even started dating, back in 1994, and for 22 years we were co-writers, collaborators, everything. And it appears to be, sadly, the end of that era, or at least that's the way it seems right now. And I am not sure what the status will be of some of the projects that are in process. And so I can't really comment on that right now. But this show, music is really, there's a lot of Brendan in this, and it's beautiful work. It really is.
And your own role includes both writing all the lyrics as well as being the star performer.
That's right. This began, actually, the idea of this began as a one-woman show that we were going to do. And I am so glad that when we brought on our director, Lisa Peterson, one of the first things she said was, okay, well, you got a lot of answering machine messages and phone calls, and you're talking about Ernest Shackleton and singing about Ernest Shackleton. So where is he? We need to see him. And so when we changed it from a one-person show to a two-person show is when it really started to soar and take off. But yeah, one of the things I just love so much about this show, which is such a deep and huge passion project for me, not only because it is so oddly autobiographical, but just because it's so freaking inspiring. I have been obsessed with Ernest Shackleton since I saw a museum exhibit about him with Brendan in 2003 and saw those images and learned the story of how he just did not give up hope and did not give up hope regardless of how dark and hopeless everything seemed. He's just such a paragon of optimism, and being immersed in that feeling is cathartic, and it is hopeful, and I think it's also important for our society, like to really hear this message, this optimism, this female empowerment, this self-reliance, this being able to get rid of toxic energies in your life and not settle for those.
What I really like about the concept of the show and your description is that you are taking an icon of bravery and optimism, but someone whose exploits seem a little bit removed from our day-to-day experiences. We think, here's this great physical adventurer who endured these intolerable conditions and camped out on an ice floe for 3 months or whatever it was. There's a certain point where a hero becomes so heroic we can't relate to them anymore. We can't imagine ourselves in that position. And what you've done is you've connected that kind of big picture, broad, almost cinematic kind of bravery, and you've channeled it into the daily life of a character we can connect to. This isn't a question. This is just praise.
Well, thank you. I don't think I've heard anyone say that particularly before. And I think that's probably true. But like the reality of, it was actually 13 months they were drifting on the on the ice floe, and it was a 3-year ordeal from beginning to end, and it is really unimaginable. And to sort of live in the specifics of that. Of the language of what it must have been like to be rowing 800 miles in an open boat in the worst sea in the world while you're starving and you have frostbite and you're just wearing some wet Burberry fabrics, and there's ice water waves drenching you every 3 minutes and almost capsizing you. Like, what does that actually feel like? And then for Shackleton to be able, in the midst of all of these privations and this horror, for him to be able to appreciate the beauty of the Antarctic as he's doing it. And when you read his diary, that's what he does. He uses this beautiful language to describe, the endless gaping sky and the gorgeous glaciers and the unbelievable beauty that he was seeing. And that he could find that in his soul is just endlessly inspiring. And if we can connect that and make people feel that ability and open their hearts that way, then we have succeeded.
We can also imagine if someone tried to just make a straight-up musical about Ernest Shackleton, it might come across as a little overblown and maudlin, not because his adventure wasn't amazing, but that the medium of musical theater doesn't lend itself to physical travails in that same way. You might just have, here's another song about eating fish for dinner, and there might be a certain kind of stagnation to the whole thing. But in connecting it metaphorically to someone whose emotions are very familiar to us, I think you've stumbled upon something really interesting. Let's talk a little bit about some of the more interesting aspects of the score itself. And I want to touch back to our discussion earlier about your use of the electric violin. And I was hoping you could also introduce our listeners to the concept of live looping and describe how that plays into the score.
Sure, absolutely. So one of the premises for this show is that Kat, my character, is a composer who likes to use live looping in her work. And so that means I'm basically surrounded by a bunch of gear, and I have a computer that's running a program called Ableton Live. And what that does is put every little bit of music that you create becomes a clip, which is a little, like basically a square in a big grid. And then the rows of those little cells, little clips of music, those become what you call a scene. And then you can navigate down from row to row, from scene to scene, and change what you're hearing. So, for example, I would hit a pedal, I would record a little violin, a couple of bars of music, and then that would play back, and then I would layer another one on top of it. And so you can keep doing that until you have a nice little, groove or a little, chamber orchestra of violins. And then you can add even more on top of that. So I play several violin parts in a row, and then I add some percussion, and then there's some keyboards, and then you basically have the whole band created by one person. And the way specifically the opening number is set up, and there are other parts during the show as well where we use the live looping, it just sort of demonstrates all the different instruments and sounds that Kat can create as a single person in a song called Stop, Rewind, Play, Record. And I think that one song took more planning, rehearsal, organization, and learning by far than any other in the show, just because it's a real collision of left brain and right brain. It requires just a bunch of pre-planning so you know where you are. And it's also choreography with pedals and movements and stuff like that. And because it was such a steep learning curve, it's like another 10,000 hours that you have to put in to learn how to do this in addition to playing your instrument.
Let's pause for another song break. This is a selection from Earnest Shackleton Loves Me and is the aforementioned song Stop, Play, Rewind, Record. Though it's harder to appreciate without the visual, you'll get a taste of what live looping is like. Now, since I want to properly represent Val, here are a few important disclaimers. 1, this is a live recording from a staged performance rather than a studio-produced track. It thus has a lo-fi feel to it. It's also from the prior production of Ernest Shackleton Loves Me and might not reflect recent changes to the material. All of that having been duly disclaimed, I think it's a fabulous and evocative song, and I think you'll like it.
36 hours. 36 hours. 36 hours.
What I've done my whole life long. I got my reel to reel. I can always take some comfort in a song. 'Cause before I could
back and edit things out. Completely hopelessly addicted to recording. You can act without fear and you can wipe away doubt. When you're recording, you can wrap yourself up inside a big wall of sound and nothing's written in stone. It feels so good when you're recording that you almost can forget that you're broke, that you're cold, that you're truly alone. You can't make it alone. I'll never make it alone.
So while we were writing the show and waiting, because of course a big part of musical theater is waiting for the next opportunity to do the next production or reading or whatever it is. So it's been 8 years. And so during those 8 years, created separately a live looping concert that I can go do by myself, separate from the show, where I can just bring with me my live looping gear, my pedals, my equipment in 2 suitcases, and I can go do a whole concert. And as a violinist and singer, I never thought I would be able to do that by myself. And so it's been sort of a bucket list item. And now I can do it.
You have this whole skill set that you developed working on the score for the show where you're coordinating a lot of different gear and you're choreographing the laying down of these loops one on top of the other. It sounds like the solo tour is the opportunity to take the skill set and bring it outside of the show.
Yes, exactly. And so I've done it, I'd say 10 or 15 times in different locations. And I actually do a song from Shackleton with the live looping, and it's exhilarating. I love doing it because it sort of makes your brain fire on all cylinders at once. And it's one of those things that kind of hurts your brain when you're first learning it, and then all of a sudden it'll get easier. And it's gotten to the point now where I'm pretty good at it.
A few years ago, I got to see John Bryan in concert, and he does something very similar in a pop music context where he'll sit down at the drums and lay down a drum groove, and he'll stand up, and the drum groove keeps going because it's been recorded, and then he'll lay down the guitar, and he'll lay down the bass, and then finally he'll lay down the vocal, and he's essentially created a song arrangement in front of you. I'm guessing the mechanics are essentially the same as what you're doing.
Yes, that's exactly the same thing.
It's, for the benefit of our listeners, if you haven't seen this sort of thing in person, it's a fascinating kind of performance to watch because it is blending together aspects of what we think of as laboratory recording in the studio recording, where you're doing things one at a time and you're layering one thing after the other, and you're taking that process out of the studio and you're doing it all in real time in the unforgiving environment, the can't make a mistake environment, because you'll hear that mistake over and over and over again, and subjecting it to an audience.
Now, I just have to say one thing, which is I have definitely had to let go of the can't make a mistake idea, because that is just impossible. And I have gotten very zen about that, because for me, I don't think there has ever been, or nor will there ever be, really perfection in this. And getting to actually enjoy hearing that little flub over and over and over is part of, I think, what also makes it clear that it's really happening and that it is not being mimed. You know, there are a lot of people who come to the theater and think, you know, are they really playing? Is she really playing the violin? Are they really doing live video? You know, the Skyping, all of those things, and people question it, but it's clear, and it becomes even clearer when you can hear an imperfection or two.
Are you recording to the equivalent of a click, kind of a grid, so that if you're trying to record a 4-measure phrase, it's going to be exactly 4 measures no matter what you do? Or is the phrase defined by the length of whatever you played, and if that spills over past the boundary of measure 4, well, that's just how long the phrase is going to be?
No, we have a click going. We have Wade and I each have one ear monitor in our ears. It's like a little earplug that we can hear the click track, and we can hear the voice of our music director as well, who is backstage. And so we make sure that we're all in line with each other that way. So
you are spinning a lot of plates at the same time.
Yeah, we all are. There are no slackers in this show. Yeah. Because there are, in addition to what I do on stage with playing the violin parts and the percussion and keys and stuff, there's more that goes on. I mean, so some of the music is very symphonic sounding, like I think you said cinematic. Some of it sounds very much like that. And so there are some pre-recorded parts, and there's also parts that Ryan, our music director, is playing live backstage. So so you'll hear things that sound like big brass sections and all of that, and that's being added onto what I do. And sometimes we hand off the keyboard playing. Like I'll play some, and then he'll start playing it while I go do something else, while I'm, rowing the rowboat out in the front of the stage.
What's really interesting to me is that there is an absolutely perceptible through line to your entire career from your band days to present day, because you started as performers in the trenches of facing an audience and creating the music live and being both the writers and the interpreters, which is what we think of when we think of a band. That's what they do. Unless they're a cover band, they're the source of the material and they're the performers. And the paradigm for a typical musical theater composer is someone sitting comfortably by the piano and they write something, perhaps it's brutally hard, and then they laugh evilly and they toss it over the wall, and some performer has to interpret it and bring it to life. And it might be a different performer for a different show at a different location. Whereas what you're doing keeps that connection between writer and performer and allows you as a writer to specify things that I think a traditional musical theater writer could not specify. I don't think many writers could create something of the complexity that you have and trust that whoever ended up with it was going to be able to do it.
Well, thank you very much. It definitely is possible to pass it along to someone else as we move forward with the show. I'm sure that we both are going to have understudies or covers, excuse me. And that actually happened once already when we were in New Jersey, and I had a prior commitment to go see a dear, dear friend of mine get married, and I had to go, and there was a weekend of shows that I couldn't do. So we actually trained the wonderful Angel Desai to come in and do what I do. But it had been created already, so that it is choreography. It's coming in and learning your parts and what to sing when and what button to push and all that stuff. So I love the idea that I get to originate this and I get to perform it because it's so exhilarating to me, and I love it. I love being on the stage and getting the energy and giving the energy, and all of that is just exhilarating to me. But I also love the fact that the show can have a life that is beyond my ability to be in one place at one time.
Well, I think I heard the impatient horn of the taxi we've been keeping waiting outside your place this entire time. So I'm going to jump forward a little bit to the informational section of the interview. Please let us know, first of all, where people in New York or drivably close to New York can go to see Ernest Shackleton, where people can see your solo tour, Just Getting Good, and where we can find you on the internet and social media.
Happily. Okay. The show, Ernest Shackleton Loves Me, is playing at Second Stage, the Tony Kaiser Theater at 305 West 43rd Street, so 43rd and 8th in Manhattan. And the place to go for tickets is ErnestShackletonLovesMe.com. And everything having to do with the show is there. And we are running through June 11th in this production. As far as my live looping, I do not have dates set up for that at this moment because I've been focusing completely on Shackleton. But anything about me and adventures that I'm up to, you can find at valvigoda.com.
Val, it's been a real pleasure talking to you about your fascinating career and the dizzying array of different talents and aspects to what you've done.
Well, thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and I really appreciate your featuring me on this.
Go catch your cab, and hopefully we'll get to feature you on the show again sometime in the future.
All right. Take care. Thanks so much.
As promised, Musical Talk is giving away a pair of tickets to Ernest Shackleton Loves Me, and here's how you can win them. First, open up your favorite GPS device and determine your location. Are you in New York City? Can you physically reach New York City by or before June 11th? If the answer to both is no, then please don't enter. If the answer is yes, then send an email to feedback@musicaltalk.co.uk. I know, why can't the Brits use .com addresses like regular people? In your email, please include your first and last name, and that is your real name and not the pseudonym you use to write Harry Potter /fiction. In the subject of the email, please write, Ernest Shackleton Loves Me. In the body of the email, please write, Mike Shapiro is my favorite musical talk presenter. Okay, that last part is optional. But what's not optional is that you send the email by midnight GMT on Friday, May 19th, 2017. So if you're listening to this podcast 3 years after release, you've learned a lesson about timeliness. The winner will be randomly selected from the pool of entrants and announced by the following Monday. Thanks very much, and good luck.
So get your entries in now. Thanks, Mike. We really enjoyed that interview there. I'm going to hand you over now to the discussion that Antonia and I had about Carousel playing at the London Coliseum. Antonia, you have been to see Carousel at the London Coliseum, the home of English National Opera. Tell us a bit about English National Opera and their latest initiative to get people to go to the Coliseum.
Well, English National Opera are an opera company which exclusively performs operas in English. Musical theatre fans will probably know that in the last few years they've been doing more musicals to try and get a bigger audience because their ticket sales have been suffering. So we had Sweeney Todd in 2015, and last year we had Sunset Boulevard, and this year we have a production of Carousel starring Alfie Boe and Catherine Jenkins. Slight controversy of casting those singers at an opera house, but like you said, their home is the London Coliseum, and that's one of the biggest kind of West End theatres that there is.
So do you think Sweeney Todd and Sunset Boulevard belong in an opera house before we get on to Carousel?
I don't have a problem with ENO doing musicals, or any opera company doing musicals. A lot of opera companies are doing musicals now. For example, Opera North are redoing Kiss Me Kate. I know that, I think they did that last year, and I think they're kind of reviving it again.
And they've done Carousel as well.
They've done Carousel. They've done Of Thee I Sing. I saw a Gershwin musical there a few years ago. I don't mind them dotting musicals in and amongst their other things that they've got programmed, but what I have a slight problem with is the kind of singers that they cast, and I think we covered this before when we talked about the casting of Catherine Jenkins and Alfie Boe in this particular musical. So I got tickets for this. I was sat right at the top. I didn't spend £200 for a seat, and it's probably a good job, considering that when I turned up, I found out that Alfie Boe was not performing on that night, which is a bit of a shame. So
you had an okay seat, didn't you?
Actually, well, my mum actually booked the seats, and we paid about £35 for a balcony seat, and we had a restricted view, and they didn't say the seats were restricted view on the website, so I'm a bit cross about that. There was like a bar, which obviously needs to be there for safety reasons, but because we were so near the front, I couldn't see anything. I mean, there was someone in front of me, and I couldn't actually see anything at all, and the bar was restricting my view for the majority of it, because that happened to be where the performers were for the most of the musical. So I sat there in a very uncomfortable position with my neck cricked to one side for the majority of it, and I didn't really enjoy that particularly much. So I don't think they should be charging that price for seats up in the balcony, because I could not see a single thing.
Is it your first time seeing Carousel on stage, or are you familiar with the piece?
No, I'm very familiar with it. I've seen the film. Seen the film. I've seen clips of it on Hey Mr. Producer. I know the ballet is on Hey Mr. Producer DVD, so I've seen that, and I'm very familiar with it as a piece, very familiar with the story, very familiar with the music. So I wasn't going into it completely new. I kind of, I don't know.
I come out busting all over, you could say.
No, I text you at half time going,
half time?
Half
What was
time.
the score?
Oh, just the interval. And I text you saying, oh God, Rogerson Hammerstein, so dull is the word I use, wasn't it? It was dull. It was really dull.
It's dull because we're now in 2017 and we've seen a lot more exciting things, because Thos and you agree that they do lack humour, but they're telling a serious story, just happens to be through song. So they were breaking away from the frivolous musicals of the time and trying to do something different. Does that mean they're dull, or they were
just... They were
just...
dull at the time, but I don't necessarily think it's
So you're not
just
saying Rodgers and Hammerstein are dull. You're saying either it's the production's fault that it's dull...
Minorly, yeah.
Or it's society's fault nowadays that they are considered to be dull.
I think it's both things, because some of Rodgers and Hammerstein's work isn't dull. Like Oklahoma, I quite enjoy Oklahoma, and it's quite fun. There are fun moments in Oklahoma, but then you think of something like Sound of Music, and it's quite long, and it's quite, that is a little bit dull. But there are some quite jolly tunes in it. Whereas I didn't think Carousel has either of those things. There was not a lot of fun in it. There was a couple of numbers which are quite fun. The majority of it is quite serious and heavy, and I kind of just felt, oh God. I guess I wasn't in the mood to go into a musical that particular night and
have a serious thing.
Have to face, could be confronted with seriousness.
Well, Thriller's opposite, so you could have gone there in half time.
Is Thriller opposite? Really?
Where? Ish.
Is it? No, it's not. It's like round the corner.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just wasn't in the mood for
Half
that.
a sixpence is opposite. That's what I meant. So you knew on the day that Alfie Boe probably wasn't going to be in because he hasn't been well. He's better now. You were excited to see Alfie Boe, weren't you?
Well, I was taking my mum to see this, so she was excited to see Alfie Boe.
So what was her response when she found out?
I think she was a bit disappointed, but she's seen him so many times live that she was kind of like, well, it doesn't necessarily matter. We're going to see a show. It's not like if you were going to see his concert, it would be cancelled, wouldn't it?
The understudy's on.
So she still got a show, and she's like, well, we paid for the show, we didn't pay for the name. But like I say, we only paid £35. The people booked £200 to pay £200. They were sat in the front row. Those people were really disappointed that he wasn't performing. And
do you think it's right, though, to put all your eggs in one basket in a way and just rely on...
Well, no, I don't think that's right. And like I said, I still really enjoyed the show from the perspective of
musical fan,
yeah. But and also they just did a fantastic job. He was really good. And I don't go into a show thinking, oh great, there's the star, it's all about the star. But there were people in the audience who were just there for Catherine Jenkins, who were just there for Alfie Boe, because that's the way that ENO has marketed this musical, because they have no money and they need to market a musical based on these two massive stars because they know that it will bring people into the theatre.
I'd be there for Nicholas Lyndhurst.
He was like in one scene. He was very good though. He was very good.
Catherine Jenkins, now she is known in the popera world,
crossover world, yeah,
as a kind of warbling Welsh songstress.
Okay, let's talk about her performance, because she wasn't bad, and a lot of reviews have said that she was quite surprisingly good. The problem I have with Catherine Jenkins, which we've talked about before, is that she's just not a very good singer. She's not a very good opera singer. She can sing in tune, that's all fine, but she's not a very good opera singer. Her technique isn't particularly very good, and she's not at the standard to sing in an opera house, so she's not an opera singer. People think she's an opera singer when they think Catherine Jenkins. I think a member of the public thinks of an opera singer, they think Catherine Jenkins. But anyone who knows opera would not think of Catherine Jenkins first. But I tried to go into it with an open mind and just think...
she's not singing an opera.
No, but she's not singing opera. Her acting wasn't bad. Her acting was probably better than her singing, and that's saying something. She had a good American accent, but it was the singing that was the problem, and luckily she didn't actually sing that much in the actual production. My problem with it is that she looked down the whole time. She didn't look up once. She was playing a kind of meek character, and she was looking down quite a lot. But even when she was singing, she didn't ever look up. She kind of played to the stalls.
Too busy busting all over, probably.
No, she didn't play to the whole theatre. She literally played to the stalls. I think she looked up once, and that was when she noticed the people standing up at the end.
Maybe she knew that's where her fans were.
But also, when you walk on stage, I don't think you look at your feet when you're walking on stage. You don't look down at the floor. She kept looking down at the floor. I was like, don't look at the floor. You don't look at the floor when you're on stage. I was like, that's like just basic.
So either that's the
craft.
fault of the director, Lonnie Price, and the fact that he didn't pick it up, or it's something they worked out that's what her character did.
Yeah.
That she's shy and timid.
That's fine, and occasionally it's okay. It's okay to put that into your character. But when you're walking around on stage, you don't just look at the floor on your feet, and you also don't just play to the stalls when you're on stage. If you do shy on stage, it has to be big enough to be noticed by the person sitting right at the back of the theatre, not so subtle. If she'd been on TV or a film, it might have been fine.
Did her character change? I mean, was she doing that the whole time, or was it just something you noticed?
The character seemed to get more subdued, as obviously she got into the relationship that was making her unhappy because her husband was beating her. So she kind of got more subdued, but there wasn't enough. It was a bit of a subtle change. It wasn't a big change. When she changes, because the musical moves on like 10 years or 12 years or how many years it moves on, I've forgotten exactly how many years it moves on, from having the baby to her child being grown up. I didn't really see much of a progression. It's like this character is older now. She didn't look physically any older, but because she wasn't acting, she didn't change her physicality to become older. I don't think it was at the standard that it needed to be to compete with other musical theatre performers.
No, I don't know Carousel that well as a piece. She doesn't... Does she sing You'll Never Walk Alone?
A little bit. That's given to another character. I thought she did, because I remember that. Maybe they changed it for this production. I thought she did.
But did it work as a choice, as a financial choice, do you think?
It was full when I was there. When I was talking to the people around me, everyone said they were there for Alfie Boe.
Right.
So I don't know. I didn't actually come across many Catherine Jenkins fans while I was there. Possibly.
All in the front row, that's why.
Very probably. I don't know until they release the figures for the ticket sales. But as far as I can tell, I don't know. I think from what I can tell, it was more Alfie Boe fans there. What they've done by casting is alienate the opera-going audience that would normally go to their musicals. So by getting in new people, they've alienated their old audience. And to be honest, the kind of people that were going to this production were people that thought it was appropriate to sing along to When You'll Never Walk Alone. And the person behind me was singing along for the entire thing. And
was she an opera-going audience or an opera-singing audience?
Oh, I think she was a Catherine Jenkins fan or a Alfie Boe fan, because they were just singing along. And I was just like, this is the kind of audience that they want to get in? Is this the kind of audience they want to get in? People that sing along all the way through, or people that want to sit down and appreciate the art?
They popcorn as well. And,
no, just ice creams, but that's okay. We don't mind ice creams. At the interval.
Obviously, one of the massive things about this show is the overture and the orchestra.
The orchestra are amazing. Now, that's the best thing about this production. And some of the ENO chorus, they had to get other chorus, like musical theatre performers in to make up the rest of the chorus because there was some dancing, which might displease some people that know that they've had to reduce the amount of work that the ENO chorus do, and they're paying them less. It's a big dispute that happened, and it was in the newspapers last year. So they did actually use some of the ENO chorus, but you could kind of tell which ones were ENO chorus because they were standing around a little bit more, not do the dancing, and the actual chorus, that musical theatre experienced people that were in the chorus were actually doing the bulk of the dancing. But at least they did use the ENO chorus, and the ENO orchestra are fantastic. That's the great thing about ENO doing musicals and other opera companies doing musicals, because they can use big orchestras that many West End shows do not have the kind of resources to do. So the sound was amazing because they had this proper orchestra. So I think me and my mum both said that is the best thing that we actually got from this was the sound.
Was it your first time at the London Coliseum?
Yeah, I've not seen anything.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. As she says, opera fan, not seen anything at ENO, but I've not been in London that long, so.
As you can tell by the accent.
Yes. But I would go to something else. And I don't know if many of those people that went to see Alfie Boe and Catherine Jenkins would go and see something else there.
I kind of feel you've been blessed with the understudy for the character.
I can't comment because I didn't see Alfie Boe do it. When he was performing, he did a really good job, but I was like, I could see Alfie Boe doing this because he was very similar to Alfie Boe.
But the understudy was...
Fine.
I
did think his voice took a little bit of time to warm up. There's a few herring moments during If I Loved You, which is quite early on, and it's the first major bit that he sings. But in the soliloquy, which is the end of Act 1, he was spot on with his singing. It was quite good.
And that's a 15-minute song or something.
Yeah, it's a long number. It took a while, like I say, by the time he gets to that point, he's fully warmed up and ready to go. And he did a fantastic job. Probably, because what actually happened was the night before, Alfie Boe only did Act 1, and then he went straight on and did Act 2. Finished Act 2 off. He doesn't sing as much in Act 2. He did the matinee and the night performance, so he was well warmed up by the time he got to us. But, he had to step in the last minute the night before, so he did a really good job. I was really impressed. He was called Will Barrett.
And what did your mother think?
She enjoyed it, but she's like, I wouldn't see Carousel again. She's like, it's not my favourite thing that I've seen. And I think she was mildly disappointed not to see Alfie Boe. She was like, we're paying for a show here, we're not paying for him. So the other thing I have to say about this production, it was not semi-staged.
Right, I was going to ask you
about
this. It
was pretty much staged, like fully staged. If you've got fully staged dance numbers and bits of set being wheeled on and off.
And projections as
projections.
Well. Not very good projections, I've heard, but...
You could tell that you got the idea of what the setting was. You knew where the characters were when the scene changed. I mean, there was a revolve, which is a bit of a lazy way of changing the scene, and projections is a very lazy way of setting the scene. But it was staged, and there was fully staged dance numbers. So I had lots of sets. So to be honest, for me, it was fully staged.
Was there a carousel?
There wasn't a proper carousel. It wasn't like a carousel with a roof. They wheeled on pieces, so like put the poles of the carousel with so the horses were the words carousel,
right? Okay.
And it was spun around on the revolve, so it gave the idea and the appearance of a carousel without actually being a proper carousel. That I played once at the beginning. The opening number was one of the best things about it, except for the ballet in Act 2, which was incredible.
Now we have the Meatloaf musical going.
Yep, that's next.
We've had a lovely afternoon baking and making cupcakes with peanut butter and some lovely stuff, so we're going to eat that and have a cup of tea, but we will speak to you soon. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on Carousel.
You're welcome. Bye.
Our thanks go to Val Vigoda there, and Mike and Antonia for talking in this lovely episode of Musical Talk. Please do make sure you check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we've got some episodes up on YouTube now. Our website is, as always, musicaltalk.co.uk, Mike, not CO, and hope you do go and check that out there to listen to all previous episodes. We'll be with you again next week. Until then, have a lovely week. Bye-bye. This episode of Musical Talk is copyright 2017, apart from the songs where the copyright persists with the original creators.